Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1231 of the Juicebox Podcast. Welcome back. This is another episode in the Grand Round series. You probably know by now in the Grand Round series, we don't use the person's real name, and their voice has been changed to protect their identity. Today, we're going to talk to Alex. She is a 37-year-old medical oncologist from Israel, and we're going to talk about the healthcare system, type 1 diabetes, and so much more. One of Alex's children has type 1, was diagnosed just 2 years ago. There is a lot of spirited conversation in this episode. Please don't forget that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. When you place your first order for AG1 with my link, you'll get 5 free travel packs and a free year's supply of vitamin D. drinkag1.com/juicebox. Hey, I'm looking for you to give just a little bit of your time. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Join the registry, complete the survey, help with type 1 diabetes research. You just have to be a U.S. resident who has type 1 or is the caregiver of someone with type 1. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Eversense CGM. An implantable 6-month sensor is what you get with Eversense, but you get so much more. Exceptional and consistent accuracy over 6 months, and distinct on-body vibe alerts when you're high or low. On-body vibe alerts? You don't even know what that means, do you? EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. Go find out. Today's episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Contour NextGen blood glucose meter. This is the meter that my daughter has on her person right now. It is incredibly accurate and waiting for you at contournext.com/juicebox. Alex, what's your job? What do you do for a living?
So I'm an oncologist.
Oncologist. What is and was your training like to get that job? What did you have to do?
Where I live, there's 6 years of medical school. You get into medical school right away. You don't have an undergrad. And then you do 1 year of internship before you get your degree. And after 7 years, you're a doctor. Mm-hmm. And then you have to do your specialty. So oncology is 5.5 years. It's straight through. It's not a subspecialty.
It took you from the day you began coming out of school until you were, I guess, certified as a oncologist, 12.5 years?
Yeah. And then I had kids in the middle. So a bit longer than that.
Oh, so there was a gap of time in there. You took a little time off too.
For maternity leave. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. And now how long have you been practicing?
I finished my residency about 2 years ago.
2 years ago. What would you say day to day your job is like? What do you do most days?
So after you finish your residency, it's mostly working in the outpatient clinic in the hospital. So it's seeing patients in the outpatient clinic, and then they get therapy in the daycare center.
So we're talking about like, let's see.
Like a clinic.
A clinic that does what? Infusions?
So it's in the hospital. In Israel, it's always connected to like a big hospital.
Okay.
Like the infusion centers. So it's not like in America that there are also like smaller practices that have their own infusion center.
I see. So you see people for chemotherapy?
Yeah.
Yeah. And follow-up visits. If I think I have cancer, are you a person I come to, or are you in a different part of the chain?
Usually when you get to an oncologist, you already have a diagnosis. Okay. In other words, somebody already found that you have cancer, and then you go to the oncologist to figure out what the treatment plan should be and for the follow-up afterwards.
Are you a surgeon as well?
No.
Okay.
I'm a medical oncologist.
Medical oncologist. Great. You said you stopped in the middle there to have some kids. How many did you make?
I have 4 kids.
Wow.
1 was in medical school, 1 was in my internship year, and 2 during residency.
Jeez, that must have made it harder. No?
Yeah, but everybody starts university later in Israel because you do either national service or army before you start. So I started at age 21 and I was one of the younger ones.
How long is that army stint? Is it 1 year?
No, so for boys it's 3 years and for girls it's 2 years.
Okay.
I did national service for 2 years instead of doing army.
I see. National service means?
It's like kind of being like a volunteer in different organizations.
Go
like
somewhere,
that.
build a house, dig a well, something like that?
Well, it's more like working in schools or working, like I worked in the Epilepsy Foundation here for 1 year and I worked in school the second year.
Gotcha.
Could be like at-risk kids.
What drew you to oncology? What made you want to do that?
So I really believe in patients making their own decisions about treatments and end of life. And I feel like oncology kind of incorporates it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that in oncology, there is like you have a long-term relationship with your patients that you don't have with a lot of other fields.
I see. Which one of these kids got type 1 diabetes?
So number two.
How old?
Number 2 won the lottery. She's 9 now. She was diagnosed when she was 7.
Oh, wow. So a half a year into your practicing, she got type 1?
So she actually got, it's been more than 2 years. So she's actually got type 1 at the end of my residency.
I see.
But I'd already finished like my board certification, so it was a little bit easier.
Is there other autoimmune or type 1 in your family?
So until then, we didn't have, like I would have told you that we're all completely healthy, but she was diagnosed with celiac at the same time. It was the same blood test. And afterwards, we were diagnosed, me, my husband, and another kid with celiac. And I have Hashimoto, and my husband has psoriasis, which isn't exactly autoimmune, but it's autoinflammatory.
Mm-hmm.
And my youngest might have vitiligo. So
oh my God.
We're running autoimmune strong.
You didn't know you had Hashimoto's?
No, that I knew, but I never considered it. If you'd have asked me, am I healthy? I always said yes. Like when I gave birth, they said, do you have anything, any medications you take? I'm always like, oh, no. And I'm like, oh, wait, I do have something. Because it's just something that's so common.
How old when you were diagnosed with that?
24, probably.
Okay. So how old are you now?
37.
Why'd you laugh?
Because I can never remember my age.
Oh, okay. You're like, okay. So you've had Hashimoto's for a while. And even though it's autoimmune, if I would have asked you the day your daughter was diagnosed, are there any other autoimmune issues in your family? You might have skipped right over Hashimoto's.
No. So asking me like that, I wouldn't have skipped over it.
Okay.
But it's not like I thought about it as something that's an issue.
A health issue. Okay. So it was a surprise, obviously. When you look at your family line, your husband's and yours, do you see any other autoimmune?
No.
Just the two of you getting together might have been the soup that made
Yeah, and like we didn't even know we both had celiac before. It would have been a cute dating story, but it didn't happen like that.
So can I ask? I'm so sorry. This is a weird path to go down, but you just a lot of running to the bathroom. You didn't know why, or was it not affecting you?
No, once you have one kid who has celiac or a person in the family, so you do screening for all the first degree relatives. So we all did screening. Mm-hmm. And my husband is symptomatic. And I think it's just people didn't look for it as much when we were younger.
Yeah.
So he just lived with it because that's the way his body worked.
I take that. I mean, listen, I think that's a valid answer. I think that's, people don't understand. I'm older than you fairly significantly. And I'll tell people.
You're a half a generation, I guess, above, or one generation.
I mean, I'm 52. I don't know what that means. But all I know is that no one ever considered my health. I was either sick, with a cold or something broke, but nobody talked about nutrition or how your body worked or what was normal or what level.
Right.
That was just not a thing anybody spoke about. You would have been a major league hippie if you talked about that in my family in the 70s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So you've had this job now for a couple of years. You're obviously on a cold wind episode. So we usually skip ahead a little bit here instead of telling fun stories and stuff like that. What makes you reach out and say, I think I have something to add to this cold wind series? ContourNext.com/juicebox. That's the link you'll use to find out more about the Contour NextGen blood glucose meter. When you get there, there's a little bit at the top. You can click right on blood glucose monitoring. I'll do it with you. Go to meters, click on any of the meters. I'll click on the NextGen, and you're going to get more information. It's easy to use and highly accurate. SmartLight provides a simple understanding of your blood glucose levels. And of course, with second chance sampling technology, you can save money with fewer wasted test strips. As if all of that wasn't enough, the Contour NextGen also has a compatible app for an easy way to share and see your blood glucose results. ContourNext.com/juicebox. And if you scroll down at that link, you're going to see things like a buy now button. You could register your meter after you purchase it. Or what is this? Download a coupon. Oh, receive a free Contour NextGen blood glucose meter. Do tell. ContourNext.com/juicebox. Head over there now. Get the same accurate and reliable meter that we use. Today's podcast is sponsored by the Eversense CGM. Boasting a 6-month sensor, the Eversense CGM offers you these key advantages. Distinct on-body vibe alerts when high or low. A consistent and exceptional accuracy over a 6-month period. And you only need 2 sensors per year. No longer will you have to carry your CGM supplies with you. You won't have to be concerned about your adhesive not lasting, accidentally knocking off a sensor, or wasting a sensor when you have to replace your transmitter. That's right, there's no more weekly or bi-weekly hassles of sensor changes, not with the Eversense CGM. It's implantable, and it's accurate. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. The Eversense CGM is the first and only long-term CGM. Eversense sits comfortably right under the skin in your upper arm, and it lasts way longer than any other CGM sensor. Never again will you have to worry about your sensor falling off before the end of its life. So if you want an incredibly accurate CGM that can't get knocked off and won't fall off, you're looking for the Eversense CGM. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox.
It's really interesting because, every doctor kind of has like their traumatic patient, like the patient that you feel like you could have saved if you would have done something different. And I'm not even talking about like negligence and getting sued, but just like human error, I guess. It could be either or. So mine is actually a patient who died of decay, who had type 1. And I think that it kind of shows, or like I understood from that, how much we don't understand type 1. And that was even before my daughter had type 1.
Okay. Yeah, you're helping a person with cancer?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was like on an oncology ward, right? So we're just oncologists. And she was getting a therapy that she wasn't eating during the therapy. It was hard for her to eat and she was in pain. So they gave her a lot of morphine and then she kind of started going downhill and they decided to send her up to be in the ward so we could kind of watch her, give her fluids. They took off her fentanyl patches and they said, like, if she's kind of seems like she's in pain, like just give her a little bit of morphine. And I was the on-call resident. We did 26-hour shifts. And they called me in the middle of the night and they said, I think she's in pain. So like I went to see her, gave her a little bit of morphine. She looked really off. So I took blood tests, but sadly the blood gases didn't, they weren't good. So I never got that back. And then they called me like 2 hours later that she died. In other words, that she's not breathing. And we went and resuscitated her. And we didn't really know what happened. And when they checked her blood from the ICU, so she had a lot of ketones and they couldn't figure out why. And then they finally figured out that she was type 1. And what happened is that she wasn't eating and her blood sugars were running low. So she took off her pump and she wasn't getting any insulin. And that means that her blood sugars weren't high because that's something that we would notice in a hospital. She didn't say that that insulin was a medication that she had to get, and she took it off before. So it was like normoglycemic DKA, which was something that I didn't know existed before that. So she died a few days later in the ICU.
This feeling you have that there's something you could have done, was it as strong then as it is after your daughter's diagnosis?
No, it was really strong then. I did a whole kind of mortality and morbidity meeting with the doctors by us. I kind of researched it. And I understood that type 1 wasn't something that was just like, okay, they have type 2 diabetes or they have high cholesterol or they have high blood pressure, that it's something that you really need to notice.
How was she in the system without physicians knowing she had type 1?
So she was brought up, like, she was getting treatment. She wasn't an inpatient. And then she was sent straight to the ward, just like so that we could kind of help her out.
Yeah.
And again, they assumed that she had an overdose of morphine or fentanyl or whatever.
Okay.
And so nobody really did a full intake. But I will say that even if she would have said to me, yeah, I have diabetes, I would have been like, okay, so you have diabetes. Like you ask what medications you take. And like, I wouldn't have thought to say, hey, if you have type 1 diabetes, how come you don't have insulin on your medications?
Mm-hmm. You think if you knew she had type 1 and you might have checked her blood sugar, but then seen it be at a certain number and then...
No, they knew she had diabetes. They checked her blood sugar. It was normal.
Oh, okay. Is this the first time you're seeing her when you interact that night?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And it just doesn't click for anybody that you could have.
It doesn't click for anybody. It's like, it went through, like, usually you have a lot of people looking at something and then somebody's going to figure something out before something bad happens.
Yeah.
So I was just like the last one when the really bad thing happened, but nobody realized it. And if I put it in the other perspective, and I'm not taking the responsibility off of me or like the doctors in general, I feel like when you're type 1, it's really important. Like, you have to know about your disease and you have to know that insulin is a medication that you take and that you cannot take off your pump for a day or two. You know, you have to know that you always have to have basal insulin.
Right. Retrospectively, do you know how long she had type 1?
For years and years and years. And I think that that's also people who are older, like I find in the hospital, that people who are like in their 70s or 60s and they have a pump, I feel like they don't know quite as much about diabetes as people who are maybe diagnosed today.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also can see where if loaded on morphine, she was thinking, my blood sugar is low, I can't get too low, I'll take this pump off for a little while. Then
she wasn't actually loaded on morphine. It was just DKA. She was.
I see.
Like, I don't think that the morphine issue was at all an issue. She was going downhill because she was starting to be in DKA. I think it was misdiagnosed.
I see. Wow. Geez. Yeah. Listen, for people listening, please don't take your pumps off. Please. But isn't it crazy that even a person who's been living with it forever doesn't know, I need this insulin. I have to have it. I can't be without a background of insulin.
Yeah. And doesn't even look at it as a medication that they have to put on, like that they have to tell you about.
Yeah.
It's just like something that they have in the background. And it's funny because, well, not funny, half funny, but that a few years later, I had a patient who had type 1 and I went to visit him in the hospital. And also he had been getting chemotherapy in the infusion center and his blood tests were off. And so he went up to the ward to be an inpatient. And I went to visit him just to see how he was doing because he wasn't doing very well. And I knew he had type 1. And this is after my daughter was diagnosed. So I was super vigilant. And he said to me, oh, by the way, I don't have infusion sets here. When am I going to go home? Because I haven't had my pump on since yesterday.
Wait.
And I said, what? And he said, yeah, it came out when I was in the infusion center and then I didn't know that I was going to be admitted. So when am I going to be able to go home because I don't have my pump on?
That lack of urgency, it fries my mind a little bit. Like, I have just beaten into my daughter's head that if that pump runs out of insulin and you didn't expect it to, if it falls off, everything in life doesn't matter anymore. You stop what you're doing, head directly to insulin and get another pump on.
Right.
It's one of the non-negotiables of our existence. And to hear somebody say, oh, my thing got knocked off a day and a half ago.
And again, the reason that he thought that is because his blood sugars were normal, because he was in liver failure and he wasn't really eating and his sugars were normal. So he didn't need to get insulin from the nurse. In other words, whenever they came to check his sugar, it was normal. And he didn't feel like he needed to get insulin as a correction.
DKA is not attached to a number and it can happen very, very quickly. Yeah. And so is it fair to say that, do you meet more people with diabetes who understand it or who don't understand it? Or is it very age or generational?
First of all, in general, in cancer, like, most patients are older and type 1 is relatively rare disease. So it's not like I meet so many type 1s.
Okay.
So it's hard for me to say. But I mean, most of the people I meet are 50 and up.
Getting away from type 1 for a minute, what are your bone chilling stories that have more to do with, I can't believe a physician didn't understand this than it does diabetes?
I don't think I have other things that like stand out to me that like I'll never forget. And again, the reason I don't forget these is because for me, the DKA patient was like my trauma.
Yeah.
And afterwards, it's just I have a type 1. So I'm super vigilant about type 1.
Yeah. In your intake, you the things you wanted to talk about. I'm very interested because of the perspective you set this up at. Like basically a doctor's perspective before and after having a personal experience with the disease. But your first thing on your list is doctor bashing. So what did you want to say about that?
Oh. Well, before I do the doctor bashing, by the way, I'll say one more thing about that patient that I had, that I called the endocrinologist for the patient who was having normal blood sugars but didn't have his insulin pump on. And the endocrinologist said, and I said to him, he's type 1 and he hasn't had insulin for 2 days, for almost 2 days. Like, how much basal should I give him? And he said, what are you talking about? His sugars are normal.
Oh.
And the reason I mention this is that even an endocrinologist, he was an endocrinologist in training, in other words, it was his subspecialty. And after he talked to his boss, he did get back to me with a number of units. But even endocrinologists don't see type 1 very often, adult endocrinologists.
It's more about type 2 for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's diabetes.
And it's hard, like, even for them, like, it's hard to see, like, when there's a situation that's super serious. Like, I was saying to him, like, there's a situation here that's super serious and I need to know, what I should do. And if it would have been anyone else, they would have been said, okay.
Yeah. But he sees that number and just goes, I don't need insulin.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I mean, I hope that throughout his training, he'll get trained better. And he probably learned from that patient. But most doctors wouldn't have known to even make the call to the endocrinologist. And
yeah, I see what you're
many
saying.
endocrinologists wouldn't, and they definitely wouldn't have, said to him, no, talk to your attending physician.
Doesn't that freeze you though? Like when you see, it's funny, like when you said that, I'm almost stunned, like to the point where I can't think for a second, trying to imagine all these people out in the world who are counting on all these physicians. And a basic idea like that, I don't care if they were new or not, a basic idea like that's not understood. Like, what chance do we all have?
Yeah. So I brought that up before the doctor bashing, just because I want to say that I do appreciate that doctors definitely need more education, but I feel like the education they need, first of all, it depends on what your specialty is. In other words, there's a difference between family doctors or a pediatrician and an endocrinologist, as opposed to an oncologist or a surgeon or an orthopedic surgeon. People need to know different things. And I feel like most doctors, they don't need to know the ins and outs of diabetes. They need to know when they need to ask. In other words, that's how medicine works, because the specialties, like once I'm an oncologist, I really don't know general medicine anymore. You go, and even within oncology, I'm a GI oncologist, and I can understand about breast cancer, but even now, and it's been 3 years since my boards, I don't feel like I can treat it well anymore because I don't know the new data that's coming out.
Let me say this before we go any further, because I've been doing this series for a bit now, and I live in two different hemispheres of my thinking on this. My first is on the ground level, at a human level, you're the one saying, you need to know. And then I pull back and I look at all the stories that have been told to me, and I've tried to incorporate everybody's perspectives. And I think that doctors are in an unwinnable situation because there's so much to know and they're just people. So they have to be able to hear all the things you're saying, connect the dots correctly, then reach into their, computer bank of understanding, pull out the right answers, apply them correctly, somehow communicate them well to you. You have to do them correctly. It's pretty much impossible.
Right.
You're asking a person to do the job of a computer, which, by the way, is going to lead me to say over and over again, probably over the next couple of years on the podcast, I think that the nature of being a physician is going to be changed significantly by AI.
So I disagree.
Go ahead.
I disagree on that. It's not that I don't think that AI is going to be incorporated into doctors' worlds. And I think in general, everybody's going to learn kind of how to use it in a way that actually benefits people in society. But I think that with doctors, when you meet first of all, a lot of being a doctor is being able to relay the information and also to get the information out of the patient. In other words, the patient, they can put some stuff into a computer, but they forget to tell you a lot of really important things. For instance, not telling you that they need insulin, or not telling you that they came for something and you're kind of asking questions. And then 15 minutes later, they mention something that's super serious, but they didn't even think to tell you that before. And it's not something that you would have thought to ask.
Yeah.
So I think that we're very far from like computers being able to do that.
Well, that's incredibly common, obviously, is people just not telling the whole story. I've just recently I did this thing the other night for myself, right? I took this long-standing issue I've had in my life, and I opened up a ChatGPT 4.0 window where I was actually speaking to the computer and it was speaking back to me. And I said to it, hey, I'd like to have a long-form conversation about a health issue I've been having for 20 years. And I don't know that I'm going to get all of the information out, so let's have a back and forth. And then I did that. I actually just talked it was my phone, actually. I talked to my phone for 20 minutes. First of all, it was one of the more cogent conversations I've had in the last 6 months, which was upsetting to some degree. And I started thinking, like, maybe I should start talking to my phone about what I thought about the movie I just saw, because maybe it'll be better than some of the friends I have. It went back and forth. It asked questions. As I went along, would go, oh, you know what? I forgot to mention this. And then I added that. And what I realized was that the AI, it hears everything I say. It's not biased and it doesn't forget. So even if I mention something and then I make a left turn in the conversation and never get back to it, it doesn't forget that I said that.
Right.
I'm almost trying to say that I feel bad for doctors now, because now I'm recognizing more and more we're asking them to know everything and then be able to recall it. And that's not fair. And I don't see how anybody could do that. Does that make sense?
Right. Which is why, like, it's, you've mentioned it before in the podcast, but if it sounds like a horse,
right.
And that's what it is. Right?
Yeah.
Because in the end, like, you have to go with what's common first. And it's not that you're forgetting that there can be other things. It's that you're first checking or trying to treat what's common. And then if that doesn't work, then you have to go back and kind of ask more questions and reread the notes and think again.
But what if that AI had a conversation with your husband 20 years ago? Don't you think it would have come up and said, hey, you might have celiac?
I think it wouldn't have been hard for anybody to come up with that.
You're like, listen, we didn't want to stop eating bread. Leave us alone. But you know what I mean? Like, I wonder if, and I take your point, like, I'm sitting here trying to be very thoughtful about it, and I'm having this very entailed conversation with the AI. Most people are going to go, my head hurts. And then where do you go from there with that? Right? Like, they might
So
not be
so as a
seeing.
doctor, you have the basic questions that you're supposed to ask to try to figure out what kind of headache is it. First of all, is this something dangerous, or not? Is this something that's emergent? And then from there, you keep going to try to figure out what it is based on differential diagnosis that you have in your head.
But I can't teach the AI to do differential diagnosis?
No, that you can.
Yeah.
That you definitely can.
Listen, I know it's your job and you still have like 25 more years you got to make money. I'm going to plant my flag in this one for the future so I can come back to it. If I'm wrong, that's fair. I think that doctors' jobs are going to shift to be the human eyes on the algorithm's understanding of what's going on.
Oh, I was going to say the beauty of oncology is that it's, as opposed to other, like to internal medicine, or I'm not trying to diagnose, I'm not trying to figure things out so much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out with the patient how they want to be treated and how to treat side effects that they have and how to treat things that have to do with the cancer.
Yeah.
So I think that my job is pretty safe for
You're
the next
good.
25 years.
Yeah. Because at no point are we going to put a person in front of a computer screen and say, here, make her feel better. So like, that.
Right. Or like, this is your prognosis. What would you like to do now?
Also, I think modern medicine is insanely good at some things, right? Like the mechanical stuff, like surgery and emergency care. I think it's second to none. It's amazing. You know what I mean? But it's when it gets into that diagnostic stuff that's beyond normal, or when it gets into, something like type 1 diabetes care, which is so much more, what would you call it? Like it's more art than science, maybe. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think also that type 1 is really different than other diseases. And it's one of the only ones, I think, or the only one that I know of, that it's really like you at home have to make decisions all the time and to change your dose and how much you're giving now, how much you're giving afterwards. You can't wait the 3 months to see the endocrinologist to figure out your trends. It's like you have to change it by yourself.
Yeah.
And I think in most other, like, I can't think of anything else that's like that. that it's not the doctor actually deciding to give you a medication and telling you when to take it and how much to take it.
Mm-hmm.
So type 1 is really different even than other chronic illnesses or illnesses in general.
Why, I wonder then, why do we doctors, why do we try to give static advice for something that's so clearly ever changing?
So I think there's two answers to that. One, I don't feel like I got static advice.
Good.
When she was diagnosed, it was kind of clear, like even the person who did the pump training for us. So she also had type 1 and she said, you'll see, like you'll start changing things in your pump. So on your pump, when you see that things are kind of going wonky, you'll put your basal up, you'll make changes. And the doctor was also really clear to him. In the beginning, I called him every single day. He said, call me every morning, tell me what her number was when she woke up, and we'll decide on the basal dose. And at the every night, call me and tell me what her numbers were throughout the day. So in that sense, he was definitely saying that it's ever changing, and he was also taking responsibility for it. And I don't know how he does that with every patient.
Yeah.
And I think different patients at different points feel more comfortable saying, can I change it by myself, or I'm going to.
For you, when the phone calls went away, when it was no longer comfortable to call somebody every morning, like where did you get the confidence to keep doing that as things changed?
So I think it helps to be a doctor, first of all.
Okay.
In other words, like I never started with like not having confidence. I didn't know about type 1. I knew that there was basal, I knew that there was bolus, like I knew the basics.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, it's not as scary to use medications and to make changes when it's something that you do for other people every day.
Okay.
And I also think it's like they gave us the basics. And then when we went on a pump about a month and a half after she was diagnosed. She was on the Omnipod DASH. So I knew what he was going to say. I knew that if I was going to say, oh, she's going up higher about 9 o'clock, so I'll say, oh, so change the basal at 7.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually I said, do you still want to keep calling you?
Yeah, I think the point is maybe at the core of everything. I'll say all the time that the people who find the courage and the knowledge to make adjustments to their insulin without a doctor are the ones who end up succeeding the best. That autonomy and confidence. Obviously it's a need, but it's almost like telling somebody, like, you can make your thermostat 68 degrees, but if you want to change it, you're going to have to wait 90 days and then drive to where I am and then talk to me about why you want to change your thermostat. And for, what happens if it gets warm or cold during that time and you want to move the thermostat back and forth and you look at it and you go, I know this thing could make me warmer or colder, but I'm not allowed to touch it without going and talking to the person. I really think yeah.
I only have, my experience with endocrinologists that we're with, and that's definitely not the way, he never had an expectation that we wouldn't change things. And I think the opposite, he has an expectation that if you have the capabilities to do it, that you will. That he only doesn't do that, or people don't change it. Some people just don't have the capability, let's say, to do it or to do it in a safe way or to understand it as well, maybe.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Well, don't you think you got the autonomy because you were a doctor? No, you think this doctor tells everybody the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you got a good doctor then. So then that's the next part of this whole doctor thing, right?
So it's really complicated though to say that, because it's not that I got a lot of information. And I think maybe this goes back to the doctor bashing, is that I think that you have to have realistic expectations, like also with what you expect the doctors to know, what you expect them to explain to you when you're first diagnosed and a little bit afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And that doctors have reasons sometimes, and it's not that they don't know necessarily about why they're not saying things.
Oh, sure.
And in the beginning, you can't have all that information in the beginning. And we left the hospital without a Dexcom.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that I don't think it's a good thing to leave the hospital with a Dexcom, which I know is a minority opinion, because I think that it did two things. One is that it made me not nervous to not have my Dexcom working, because we did do it for 2 months without a Dexcom. My daughter felt her lows in school. We don't have a school nurse. She was 7 and she could still do it. She could finger prick herself in class if she didn't feel good. And also, I think that it was kind of good to just get the basics down. Carb counting. My daughter, after she was diagnosed, she would eat 5 to 6 bowls of cereal in the morning.
Yeah.
because she was starving. Now, one bowl of cereal spikes you really high hours afterwards. So I can only imagine what those 5 to 6 bowls were doing. And to me, I checked her, before her snack at school, and then we would just correct and move on. In other words, we would give the correction, give the carbs, and that was it.
Yeah.
And I think that if I would have seen all that data, and I can only imagine that she was sitting in the 300s for those 2.5 hours until she went down to 200 and something when I gave a correction. I think it's okay to wait those few months and to just get the basics down.
I'll play devil's advocate because it's fun. I think you have the luxury of feeling that way because nothing bad happened.
I don't think that something bad happens from having high blood sugars for a few hours. Definitely not for a few months.
I don't mean high blood sugars. I mean, like in the first 6 months of my daughter's diagnosis, she had a seizure. If she was,
wait, I want to say something about that.
Yeah.
Totally different if you have a toddler. I'm talking about older kids.
Okay.
Like, I think that having a toddler is completely different. You can't communicate with them. For them, definitely leave the hospital with the Dexcom.
100%. But let me ask you, let's just, again, what if on one of those mornings with all that cereal, your daughter had a honeymoon moment and you had pumped in enough insulin to cover 7 bowls of cereal and then she went to school and passed out? Do you think you'd be saying it's okay not to have a CGM? Because it's good you get to learn?
But what I think is that she checked herself and she knew how to treat her lows, and it gave confidence.
Oh, I agree. Oh, listen, everything you've said, there's value to. Like, I 100% agree. Like,
I don't think that would happen. In other words, she started honeymooning, right? Like, she honeymooned for about a month, and in that month we didn't have a Dexcom, and it drove me crazy because we were at the park and suddenly she wasn't feeling good, and she was 40. Like, we had bad lows, or she went to sleep and she wasn't feeling well, so I checked her sugar when she went into bed, and she was 30. It's not that we didn't have lows. We didn't have. It kind of showed me that yes, she would feel her low, and yes, we can deal with it, despite the fact that I don't know how fast she's falling.
Yes.
So we gave those carbs, and we checked her again after 10 minutes, and then we gave more carbs if we needed to. Seizures are few and far between in general.
You think?
So it's not that nothing bad can happen, but I think that in the month usually after you're diagnosed, or definitely in the first few weeks, your blood sugar was so high that until you start honeymooning, you're usually not going to have crazy lows.
Okay.
So I think it's okay to have at least those 2 weeks of, going home, figuring out what you're doing, and not seeing all the data. And again, it's not that I think that it's good to not have the alarms. It's that I think that seeing so much data maybe isn't the best thing when you come out of the hospital.
Listen, I'm not arguing with you. I will say that, call me back in 20 years, maybe, is the way I'm going to say this. But my daughter has had she had one seizure when she was 6 months old. We just didn't know what we were doing. We had a high carb meal. We thought we did the right thing. She took a nap and had a seizure in her sleep. It happened again a couple of years later on activity. So we were at an amusement park all day out in the heat. At the end of the day, she saw a vendor holding like popsicles. She asked for one. We bolused for it. She had a seizure 2 hours later. I know now, by the way, that at the end of all that walking
super
and
fast
that
acting carbs and activity.
All that, it was a super I didn't need to give her any insulin for it, right? I know that now. She didn't have another one again until the night of her senior prom, on a day when she ate very little food, had very little insulin, was wearing life-saving equipment and all that other stuff. What I'm going to tell you is I 1,000,000% believe and agree with your message. I really do. And I think that the only reason you're able to deliver it is because you didn't have one of those random things happen to you. Because I don't think you wear a CGM for most of the time. You wear it for the moment that you can't plan for, that you don't see coming. That's my feeling. And you just haven't had one of those moments yet. And I hope you never do. Now
we're on a CGM. But I think that when you're diagnosed and your sugars are super high, it takes time for them to come down. So I think that you do have a leeway of at least 2 weeks where it's okay. You don't have to be stressed about getting a CGM, because I see people writing, don't leave the hospital without one. It's okay to leave the hospital without one. You have to.
Yeah. No, I take your point. Like, it doesn't, like, I do see
I
what
mean,
you're
we
saying.
had one after 2 months.
Yeah.
We didn't have, and I would have wanted to have one even before when she was honeymooning,
Mhm.
and I knew that she was having lows, and that we were.
No, I think it's a good conversation to have.
Catch them.
I also don't think there's a right answer. And I think that the right answer is for whatever ends up working for you. What I'm saying is it also has to do a lot with your personality. Like for some people who are like, look, all that data would be overwhelming. There are other people who would be like, I'd find all the data comforting. Like, so your personality, the situation you're in, etc. But I hear what you're saying. If you can't get one right away, like, please don't act like it's the end of the world. You can test, you can be careful, you can put safeguards in. And there's a lot to learn along the way. You know, I'm agreeing with you and at the same time trying to have a conversation, right? You know that, right? Yeah. Okay. All right.
And by the way, like in terms of outlook, like if my daughter had a seizure, right, would I freak out or not then and also afterwards? Also in that sense, like being a doctor, I think, and it's possible it's my personality without being a doctor, but like the way that I look at illness and death, and I'm not saying death from diabetes, but in general, fatal illnesses and chronic illnesses, I think it's different than like you were talking before about like how modern medicine is amazing in a lot of ways. And I think that it kind of got us used to thinking that everything is fixable and that like illness and death is something that's traumatic and not natural. I think that I have a different perspective on that also.
Yeah.
So it's also like if we need to use glucagon, I hope we don't need to. I'm not sure exactly what my reaction would be and if it would be freaking out afterwards for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I also don't think it happens to some people at all. Like, I mean, it didn't happen to Arden. Like, she had that seizure a couple of years ago, and, you know, she was shook for a couple of days, maybe 3 days, actually. Like, she was like 17 years old. Like, she slept in our bed for a couple of nights afterwards. And then one day she just got up and she's like, I'm going to go in my room. And I was like, okay. And then we talked a day or so later. We talked about it on the episode where she just said, like, I've thought it through. I didn't do anything wrong. And that seemed to comfort her. For so many days and weeks and months and years, I do the same things over and over again, and I was okay. Yes, there was a variable in here that, like, she's like, but it's uncommon, and I don't think it's going to happen again. So I'm going to go back to my life. Whereas somebody who's maybe bent towards depression or anxiety, that could end up making them scared for a decade. Like, and I've seen it happen. You know what I mean? So it's interesting to talk about blanket statements over top of such a moving target, over top of so many different personalities and experiences. And that's why there's no like one size fits all accommodation for diabetes. Sure. Yeah.
It's just my perspective.
No, I love it. Are you kidding me? It's fantastic. I need to listen. Without these conversations, I don't know if you know this, the podcast is boring, and then nobody listens, and then Scott's got to get a real job, and I don't want to do that. So, can you imagine if I worked at a store or something like that where you came into? I would chat and chat. Nothing.
I was going to say, you'd be good at talking to the customers.
Yeah, great. Oh my God, I'd be the most popular cashier. I'd be like, hey, what do you know about this? And then we'd start talking about something crazy I heard on a podcast, probably. But anyway, so on your list now, what's a non-diabetic? Here's your list. I'll give it to everybody. Doctor bashing, non-diabetic number, parenting versus body autonomy. I love this one. I want to make sure we get to that. Why don't we do that one next? What do you mean by that when you say parenting versus body autonomy? Because I have a lot of thoughts.
Before we go there, can I say one more thing about the doctor bashing?
You want to do some? But doctor, you want to?
No, so I feel like I doctor bashed, but I didn't say the other side. Go ahead. Is that like I tried listening to the grand rounds and I couldn't. I stopped in the middle of the first real one.
Okay.
And I think again that you really have to take in perspective like what you expect of a doctor and what you expect of yourself. And I really feel, and like we talked about a little bit in the beginning, but that like it's your illness, and it's like I'm freaked out that my daughter's going to go to the hospital when I'm old and can't go with her, and nobody's going to know, how to advocate for her.
Yeah.
But in a normal world or person that you're not by yourself, and either you can advocate for yourself or have a family member advocate for you, like I feel like that's really like where the education needs to be. And the education for doctors, again, like has to be, and I kind of mentioned it before, like it's how to not miss something that's important. And that's true about every illness and not only type 1 diabetes. And it's knowing that you have to call the endocrinologist if you're going into surgery with somebody who came in with type 1 diabetes and they're not conscious and they can't talk to you and say things, or, how you're supposed to do their sugars when they're in the ward and they're getting, I don't know, TPN, or they're getting glucose in their,
So I think you being a physician and the nature of your personality, it gives you a certain perspective, obviously. But let me ask a couple of questions and see if you see a through line here. Once a week, 3 men in a truck come down my street and take my garbage away.
Mm-hmm.
If they took 2 of the cans and not the third can, do I have to go outside and advocate for them to take all the garbage?
I think, first of all, that you could say, maybe they didn't take it because one of them had to go to the hospital suddenly.
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? Like it's not. I didn't see this once and say it out loud.
I'm not saying that the doctors don't have responsibility. I think that the expectation that they'll have so much responsibility or so much knowledge that's not realistic.
Oh, I agree with you. Yeah.
And that therefore, mostly you have to have it, and they have to know, hey, this is something that we have to check out. And it's also knowing a doctor has to be able to ask the patient, oh, you have type 1. How do you get your insulin? Oh, they have a pump and a CGM. Okay, during your hospital stay, do you want to take care of it, or do you want us to take care of it? Mm-hmm. And that has to be a conversation that can be had with the doctors. And it doesn't have to do with them understanding. It has to do with them understanding the type 1, the type of disease it is.
Right.
And that a patient who's awake can take care of their diabetes better than they can. And also in the hospital, generally patients, like when kids are sick or people, I just know about kids because I have a kid and I'm not the one that's type 1, mm-hmm. but it's really hard to manage blood sugars. And it's really hard to manage blood sugars for somebody else.
Yeah.
And so I think that you also have to have grace in the hospital, that in the end, when you're in the hospital, they're trying not to kill you. If you came in for diabetes, they really know how to take care of it, right? They know how to take care of DKA really well. But if you went in for something that's not connected to diabetes, they're taking care of that thing that they have to take care of. And they're making sure that your diabetes is decent. And decent is decent in the hospital, not decent in
the real world. But how are somebody supposed to know that? Like, so if I'm just a family or an adult and I've been alive for 20 or 30 years, and so far healthcare has been, one time I got the flu and I went to the guy and he gave me Tamiflu. Or I fell and my arm broke and I went to the guy and he fixed my arm. How am I supposed to know all of a sudden that the all-knowing, all-seeing magic doctor who makes more money than me, drives a better car than me, went to more school than I did, says they know all about medicine? How am I supposed to know they don't know? Or that they don't have...
So the good news is that in Israel, we make very little money. It's a public healthcare system. Everybody thinks that they know the best thing for everybody in this country, and they will tell you that. And nobody's PC or speaks with respect. So we don't have that problem.
Listen, I know a lot of Jewish people, and if I could make everybody Jewish, then I would assume that they could advocate for themselves. But what about the people? What about the people
I'm just kidding. We're also very nice.
Oh, no. I didn't mean it in a poor way. But you know what I'm saying, though.
I'll tell you how, because when you're in the hospital, that's like a blip in your month or your year. Mm-hmm. And then you have a primary care doctor and you have an endocrinologist, and they're seeing your A1Cs, and they're seeing, the endocrinologist is looking at your trends. But even the family doctor sees your A1C went up from, I don't know, 6.3 to 7. Yeah, they're supposed to notice that. They're supposed to say to you, hey, what's going on? Maybe you need to go back to the endocrinologist. Maybe we can talk about it and figure out what's going on. But that's not for the hospital. That's for you're not supposed to leave the hospital, or like the hospital isn't your primary care. And diabetes is really something that has to be handled in primary care.
Yeah. But how are people supposed to know that?
Because their doctor sees it. I see people's A1Cs. Like as an oncologist, I'm not taking care of it. I see that somebody has an A1C. Let's say somebody had colon cancer and they're coming to me and they're healthy now. They don't have cancer and they're just coming for a checkup, and they did blood tests for me, right? I care about specific things, mm-hmm. and I don't care about the diabetes. So when I see that they have an A1C of 7, I write to their family care doctor that they need to go see to a diabetes clinic. And I ask them, who's taking care of your sugar? Who's taking care of your diabetes?
I'm not being clear, I don't think. If I go to a hospital, how am I supposed to know that's not where I get this care? Doesn't that seem like the place where you get that care? If you were a person on the outside who's not connected to the medical industry at all, you're not a doctor, you're not a nurse.
You don't go to the hospital when you just have a flu. You go to the hospital because you have something serious. So I don't think anybody thinks of a hospital as a place that's like where you get regular care.
I swear to you, I think you're wrong. I think that people I don't think they think of the hospital and the doctor's office and an emergency care center. I don't think they think of them as anything different. I think they believe it's the place they go where people who know better than them are. And when you get there,
know better than them about specific issues.
Yes.
And again, I find that that's something that the people have to be educated.
Yeah.
In other words, like,
How are we going to do that? How are we going to do that?
Talking about how, about learning about their disease and actually, going on Google and looking for answers, asking your doctor questions.
I heard an actor on a podcast the other day tell me that straight lines aren't a real thing. I heard a basketball player tell me that the globe is flat. You want them to know about this too? Like people don't know about anything they don't know. Inside of my sphere, the world I've set up for myself, I'm all knowledgeable. If you take me outside of my sphere, I don't know a damn thing about anything. And so what I'm saying is that people who have never been sick a day in their life just think that when they get to the hospital, everyone they're talking to knows everything that they need to know. And where that problem comes in is that obviously those people don't know everything. But if I think they do, then I take what they say as gospel. I also believe there's nothing else, because you don't go to the doctor and he tells you, hey, you have to take one of these pills every day at 8 a.m. on an empty stomach. Take it Monday through Friday for the rest of your life. You don't imagine that they left something out.
I think times are changing, first of all.
Go ahead.
And it could be different cultural things, but I think that it's not the same, like they talk about a lot in medical school, and that people don't come to the doctor anymore like that. Maybe the people who are older, but not the people who are younger. And again, it's not that I don't think that you need to advocate in the sense of arguing with the doctor on call, but you need to know what you need them to be aware of and what things are really important.
Yeah, dig into this for me. What does advocating mean to you? If I have to advocate for myself, what is it I have to do?
So first of all, to me, it's even at the start, the doctor comes and asks how you are. So, you have to put your type 1 diabetes in the front of that conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you're sitting in the ER. It's only if the doctor is not doing those basic things, right? That's when you have to advocate in a way that's maybe more arguing or standing up for yourself.
So
I think in general that in life you have to stand up for yourself. It's just the way it is. An ER has 1 million people in it, and in the end, and it's sad, but you have to make yourself heard.
So you just said if the doctor doesn't do what they're supposed to do, I have to make them do it. How do I know what they're supposed to do?
No, you don't have to know what they're supposed to do in terms of your stomach ache. You need to know your type 1 diabetes. You need to know your chronic illnesses, that if something goes wrong, you can die. That's you need to know what that means. And in type 1, you know what that means.
Right.
You have to be getting insulin. You know that you have to be checking your blood sugar, right?
Is there a world where I should expect a doctor doesn't know that?
Again, I think that in type 1, as opposed to type 2, that they won't necessarily notice it in the same way. If a type 2 is in the ER, right, for 24 hours, it's not the biggest deal in the world if they didn't quite get the insulin doses that they were supposed to be getting, right? Mm-hmm. 24 hours, it's not going to be the end of the world. I don't think that you can expect that the ER doc is going to notice that your pump is off and that you're not getting your insulin. Because when you're in the ER, they don't ask you for they don't give you your basic medications, at least not here. If you go to the ward, so then you sit down, and you write in all the medications and you have all those orders. But if you're in the ER, you have to tell the doctor if there's something that you need to get. In other words, it's not something that just happens.
So I should trust the doctor? Yes or no?
I think that you should trust doctors. And I think that the discussion with the doctors starts from trust.
So let me keep going. So I have type 2 diabetes. I've been told by a doctor already that it's very important for me to take my insulin every day, keep my blood sugars in a certain place. And then I go to the ER for, I don't know, I can't fart, whatever. And now I'm in the ER, and for a whole day, they don't care that my blood sugars are high. And then they're not.
They do care. There's no way that they're going to let you be riding so high. They'll give you corrections.
It happens all the time,
and if you're there for 24 hours, you should tell them when it's 8 o'clock at night or 9, whenever you take your long acting, you should say to them, listen, I have to get my long acting. And then the doctor will put in the orders for that. But you can't expect the doctor to remember that you're type 2 and that you're on MDI and that you're supposed to get your Lantus and that you've been in the ER for more than 24 hours. So you have to get it sometime in that time frame.
Right. No, I agree that the person should
remember to say that.
I agree that the person should recognize that they need to take their insulin on their own. But also they may be thinking that you're going to take care of it. And also my bigger point is that if If a doctor's told me, hey, my blood sugar should be between 90 and 120, that's optimal. And then I get to the hospital and my blood sugars are 180 to 220 and they go, it's okay while you're here, it's fine. How do I not go home then and think, oh, maybe 180 to 220 is okay? Maybe the first doctor was wrong.
I think that there, obviously there's a lot of space for educating doctors, but I think educating doctors is educating that. In other words, like that a doctor should be able to know to say to a patient, like when you're in the ER, sometimes your sugars are higher. You know, when you go home, you'll go back to doing what you usually do, or go back to your endocrinologist if it's not working out.
I'm just saying that how do we not expect that person who's now been through that hospital experience doesn't leave there believing that a higher blood sugar is okay?
They still have a family doctor. They still have somebody who's checking their labs every once in a while, and somebody who's been to the ER should definitely. Their family doctor should know that happened. So there's always supposed to be somebody who's catching that. Do
you really think that happens, though? Do you think people leave the ER and then call their GP?
I think that's supposed to happen.
Oh, yeah. Well,
listen. I think that's where, but I think that's where, like, the issue of, like, how can you make the healthcare system better? It's not for all doctors to know about type 1 diabetes. It's to be able to have a situation where, you go into the hospital and then you like somehow get sent to your GP, or your GP knows, or they tell you, you have to take this back to your GP. You get a discharge paper, usually, like by us, it says, bring this to your family doctor.
You're ignoring the human aspect of it afterwards. Nobody's going to do that. They think they're okay now. They left the ER, the pain's gone. They farted. They're good.
I think that the people who think like that are also going to have a really hard time controlling their type 1 diabetes because they're not involved.
Well, yeah. Oh, but that's my point. My point is that of the, like, I don't know what it is now, 1.8 million Americans that have type 1 diabetes, a very small percentage of them even use an insulin pump or know what one is.
But if you see somebody in the ER, right, who came because of DKA, because somebody like that is probably going to have high sugars when they come, right?
Okay.
Then they should get an endo consult, and they should get an appointment for the endocrinologist.
But what if I end up with the endo who didn't know that the person needed basal, even though their blood sugar was lower?
Well, that's what I'm saying. There is a part that obviously, like, doctors need to, but I think that what you hear, right, is you're hearing people who have bad experiences and not as much most of the people who are having a decent or good experience. And that's just the reality of having.
I think most people are having bad experiences and few people are having good experiences. And I think the numbers about people's A1Cs like bear that out. Like, I think that I do a podcast for a very small section of people, and that most people who have type 1 diabetes are not even hearing this.
Probably, but I think that that's also why doctors need to be able to give rules that'll keep health decent and not necessarily the best.
But even if they're supposed to do that,
it's going really late. So
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Talk about the other thing.
Go ahead.
No, I don't have a problem.
Oh, I love this conversation, by the way, and I really appreciate you having it with me, because a spirited conversation like this is the only way to get the idea into people's heads. Because I'm not certainly saying that there aren't great physicians, and I'm not saying that people don't drop the ball in their own care all the time. That obviously happens. I'm just saying, from a human point of view, I don't think you can set up a system that relies on the average person to understand what they're supposed to do for themselves.
So I think that in America, the system is much more complicated and a not good system, right? Because, everybody, you have your insurance and you have this and the other, nobody's really talking to each other. But I think it works differently in other countries, and that there's something to learn.
I would imagine there's something to learn from everybody. Yeah, for certain. Okay. Parenting versus body autonomy. This is another one. I have a ton of thoughts.
I'm just going to say, I do want to talk about the diabetic goals, though. So save 2 minutes for that.
Well, it doesn't have to be just an hour. Can you go a little over?
Yeah. No, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine. Just like sometimes you ask at the end, like, oh, was there anything else you wanted to say?
I like that you listen. Okay. So parenting versus body autonomy. What made you say that?
So I feel like a lot of people, like they're like, oh, it's been 5 years and my kid's ready for a pump now. So what are you guys talking about? Or like, we're definitely, it's her body or his body and their decision. And I've heard you kind of say it also, I think, but I really don't agree with that. And I think that parenting as a whole is deciding what's best for your child. In many, many aspects, right? We push them to do the things that we think will be good for them. We choose a lot of things for them. And I think that the issue of going on a pump is that your kid can't know what it feels like to be on a pump and what it can help with if they didn't try it. Now, when you go on a pump, you have to know that whenever you change something, right, going from a pump to an algorithm pump or going, back to MDI, it's always going to take a while of figuring things out because different things work differently. And you can't expect to be on a pump for 1 month and be like, oh, it does work or it doesn't work. So I think that you have to push your kid. In other words, like I didn't ask my daughter if she wanted a pump. I said to her, listen, and I didn't even ask her what pump she wanted. I looked at the pumps. I checked what I thought would be best for her. And then I said, hey, look at this video online. We're going to get a pump soon. And when you get a pump, you'll be able, I feel like a pump is really important. In diabetes, there's a lot of disordered eating and eating disorders, right? And I feel like a pump is really, really important for that. It helps you keep your eating just being natural. When you're hungry, you eat. When you're not hungry, you don't eat. And if you want another bowl of pasta in the same meal, you just give yourself a little bit more insulin.
Yeah.
And especially like now we changed to Lumjev. So even more so, it's like we don't have to pre-bolus. And that makes the eating even more natural, except unless she's high and we have to bring her down first.
Fantastic.
So I think it's the wrong thing to do.
Well, Alex, now this is boring because
too much autonomy.
We agree. So this is so boring now because you and I agree.
We agree, but I feel like on the Facebook page that it's a minority opinion. And maybe not. Maybe it's who you hear. I don't know.
Somehow my body, my choice got mixed in with it's their body. If they don't want to wear something, they don't have to. That would be nice if they didn't have diabetes. And I would agree with you, but.
And again, if your kid is on a pump for 3 months, so you've already, you've given it a shot and they don't like it. So yeah, go back to MDI because they understand, like my daughter understands that if she doesn't want the pump, then she's going to have to do a lot of injections.
Yeah.
And that she'll have to do corrections with an injection. And also, especially for little kids and definitely during honeymooning, when you can only give full units, sometimes she didn't want to eat a snack that was 30 carbs when she was a 1:30 ratio. And like a pump gives you all these things besides like actually be able to, change your basal and to do a lot of different things and to have an algorithm. Like just having a pump, it makes life a lot more normal and you can't know what that feels like until you've tried it.
Yeah. I agree with you. I also think if somebody doesn't want to use a pump, they shouldn't, but I don't know that we make a 6-year-old in charge of that decision. I don't know listen, my son doesn't have diabetes, but he's 24. And the other day we were talking about stuff where he's looking for jobs and stuff. And I asked him a question and he goes, dude, I don't know. In my head, I'm like 14. And I'm like yeah, exactly. I think the way I've said it over and over again in the podcast is I don't know many other big life-changing decisions that you let 10-year-olds make.
Right. And I think like it's not only about like a pump, it's also when we wanted to change the type of when we wanted to start looping. So she was dead set against it. She liked her PDM. She knew how to use it. She didn't want to learn how to press other buttons, and she really didn't want to do it. But again, like I didn't ask her like, hey, do you think we should try this thing? I said to her, listen, I found something I think will be better for us, and we're going to give it a shot, and we're going to see how it is. And if you tell me later that you don't like it, so we'll go back.
This is how I do it too. That's exactly how I do it. I also, even now that Arden's older, she's 20 soon. She'll be 20 in a couple of months. And just recently, she got low at school and we were texting her and she's like, stop texting me. And I said, answer me and I won't text you. And she's like, you don't need to do this. And I said, oh, you don't want me to do this? That's fine. I said, start paying for school yourself and it'll be fine. I was like, but right now, if you want me to pay for college, when I text you about this, you text me back. That's it. Small price to pay. Right, Alex? What are we asking for? She don't have to pay the money. She just has to text me back.
Right.
And then we had a conversation later where my wife and I explained to her, like, look, I understand that it sucks. Like you're sitting down, you're working, you're distracted. You already fixed your blood sugar, right? Like it's been taken care of. The number just hasn't bounced yet. And now we're bothering you. So the blood sugar, so you got low, that sucked. You had to fix the blood sugar, that sucked. It took you away from what you were doing, that sucked. And now all of a sudden, here we come. And it feels unnecessary. I'm like, but you don't know our side of it. I understand your side of it. I understand it's not perfect. I wish it was. I'm sorry it's like this. But we can't just sit here wondering if you're about to die and not do anything.
Right.
And so that's what this is. And if you don't want this to be that, then that is to say that you don't want us to parent you anymore. And if that's what you want, then I really don't want to pay for college. And so like... If you're that autonomous, that's rock and roll. Like, go get a loan, okay? Listen, and I got to be honest with you. After school's over, I'm gonna look for another reason to be able to like to get her to like tell me she's okay. But yeah, like I think
there's where we kind of split on the on the parenting. But
I'm trying to make a bombastic description of what it is. But I don't think kids. Like, don't get me wrong. If Arden pushed back hard enough, I'd say, all right, this is obviously something you don't want, but then but we can't stay in this current setup if that's not part of it. So we're going to have to change the set, which I assume is going to happen over time to begin with. But your point's more about younger kids. Your kid, diagnosed at 7.
I think that it's really different when you have an older kid. And even in the teenage years, it's, possibly letting your kid do a lot of things that it's not the way that you would do it. And that's still fine as long as they're like basic rules that you agree on. I haven't gotten to the teenage years, so we can talk in 5 years and I'll let you know if that worked.
Right. You're looking for an equilibrium of safe and healthy.
Yeah.
That's what you're looking for. Yeah. But I loved your approach. Like, look, I found this thing. I think it might be better. We're going to try it. Because what is that very likely it's not going to be a problem. And
right. So within a few days, she didn't care what buttons she was pushing. And it was really nice for her that I didn't text her or call her as much when she was high or low because Loop was taking care of it.
Exactly.
And also she only needed one device instead of 2, which also makes a difference.
Fantastic. I hear high blood sugar. What number is that? That beeping?
Am I beeping?
I heard 2 beeps.
Am I high? Oh, this brings us right into diabetic goals.
Go ahead.
She's 214.
Now,
very high.
Dad, do you tell her to bolus?
She's asleep. It's 10 o'clock at night here.
Oh, so are you going to count on the algorithm to try to bring it down?
No. If first of all, I changed her pump right before we got on.
Oh, so she's got like a little rise from the change in the cannula.
So I think probably that. And no, I already see that my husband bolus quite a bit. I mean, he does like micro bolusing because when she's asleep, I don't want to crush.
Sure. I'm a fan of bolusing after a pump change. It depends.
Like we can see like if we think that Loop is being aggressive enough or not.
Mm-hmm. Especially with like Loop or IAPS after a pump change, if there's suggested insulin, I like to see it in because the site's not always perfect.
Right. But it's hard to say because sometimes it works really well afterwards and it works even better because the pump site before wasn't working and then Loop is being aggressive and then she crashes. So
exactly.
Usually I let it ride for a little bit.
It's all that easy. And your point is, how are we supposed to expect a doctor to know all that? All right. What's your next thing?
What?
What were you talking about next? Outcomes or what were you going to say?
Oh, about the diabetic goals and straight lines. And we're not going to agree on this. So
I bet you we will. I bet you think something about me that I don't think about myself, but go ahead.
No, I'm sure. I think that there's a lot of talk, right, about mental health versus health and straight lines or small bumps or what a high alarm should be, or if my numbers as a diabetic should be the same as non-diabetic numbers to keep your child safe, which that you have said before. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's the right way of looking at it. I think that in all the studies, and it's kind of like you say it with the TSH, right? Like how they decide that that's the normal range, right? Mm-hmm. They did studies and they figured out what most people had, and that became the normal range. And in diabetes, they did studies and they saw when people start having different, retinopathy and nephropathy and different things, right? Yeah. And that's how they decided, what the goal should be if you don't want to have complications. Mm-hmm. And where that starts happening is what became the non-diabetic, the pre-diabetes versus the diabetes and afterwards. And those studies are really old, but I still think that you can learn from that. You can learn a lot from that. And I don't think that there's a problem with a range of 70 to 180. And I don't think that there's a problem. Again, time and range, I feel like obviously you want to have the most that you can. But I think that, having I don't know if somebody posted it and said that they had a 6.3 A1C and an 80% time and range of 70 to 180. Those are really good numbers. Yeah. And I don't think that they need to think or feel like it has to get better. And that if they get better, your health is necessarily going to be better. Like my daughter's A1C went from 5.6 to 5.8 last time, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. So, and her time and range went down from, 89 to 87% or something like that. And within normal, the 70 to 180. And it hasn't been shown that that's going to affect your health. And I think that it's important to know like what's evidence-based medicine and what's things that we think make sense. And a lot of things that we think make sense, there are trials, and then they find out that it doesn't. And that happens in oncology all the time, right? There's this like amazing drug and they're sure that's going to be amazing. And then they do a phase 3 trial and it doesn't work. So I think that it's not like being okay with being 200 for whatever that, I don't know, 7% of the day is, or that's not actually what's going to be causing the complications or maybe even making your lifespan less. And let's say it is, like, let's say you argue that it is going to make it a little bit shorter. If you're going to live to 84 instead of 86, do you feel like that's really a shorter lifespan? Like when I give somebody chemotherapy for testicular cancer, that's what happens. In other words, they're cured, but they do die a little bit earlier than other people.
Right.
But nobody looks at that as being like, oh, they just lost years off their life.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I think that the problem becomes hey, it'll probably be okay is great until it's not. And then there's no time machine and you can't go back. And so
I don't think it's so it will probably be okay. Like it's been shown that your chances for complications with an A1C of 7, and they decided even better if you cut that line at 6.5. And again, that's without CGMs and time and range and things that are super important, right?
Yeah.
Like you can assume that those people in the trials, that part of their A1C was they were having lows that were lower than we have, right?
Some people for sure.
With the CGM and highs that were higher.
Mm-hmm.
So probably like even that data isn't showing you what it means to be in range now, like what it means to have an A1C now of a 6.3. Like our 6.3 is probably better.
Yeah. So put yourself in my perspective instead of yours. You're one very well understood person who's raising a kid with diabetes, right? And I think what you're saying makes a ton of sense. And I can tell you that my daughter has excursions up to 180 or 200 and we don't fret about them and everything else. Okay. But if you're me and you're talking to everybody at the same time and they can't talk back and I don't know who they are, if I start telling them, hey, don't worry, a 7 A1C is good. Do you not think that when they get to an 8, they'll be like, 8's not bad. It's only 1 higher than 7.
No, I think that if you say that, the ADA says that your A1C should be below 6.5 and you have to work really hard to get there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so important instead of thinking that it may be that it's for sure or better. Yeah, I would say the way it sounds is it's for sure. That's for sure better to be in the 5s or to want to be in this non-diabetic range.
Right.
That to me is problematic when you're talking to so many people that you don't know, because in the end, like I saw a post on Facebook that kind of like, I'm a lurker.
Mm-hmm.
I only
opened
a Facebook account when we all got celiac because I needed the groups to know what's gluten-free and what's not. And then I just added the diabetes groups to it. So I've never posted anything, but like sometimes I see people who post things and it's like almost they're saying like, for me, this is a good number. No, it's not for you. It's for everybody. Having a 6.3 A1C and having whatever it was, above a 70% in range, those are actual good numbers. You don't have to apologize for that.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to feel, and like people who answer like, oh, it's a good start. Like it's not a good start. It's a good place to be. And I think that you can understand that without thinking that if I went from my 6.3 to a 6.9, that's not okay. And that I have to figure things out how to bring it back below that 6.5.
So you're talking about health and I'm talking about like psychology a little bit. So like if your kid gets into school and they're in 3rd grade and they're getting a C in their class, do you go, that's great? That's average. You're doing great.
So it depends what I think that they can do. Right. Like my son is really good at math and my daughter is really good at art and not so good at math.
Mm-hmm.
And they have like different things that they're good at. So my expectations from my son in certain situations are different. And so you're talking to a huge audience, which I think makes it hard, obviously, to figure it out. But I want to give people credit that they're smart, and especially the people who are listening to the podcast, that they're smart about their diabetes. And that they know that they're trying to be healthy. That's why they're listening.
Alex, it feels to me a little bit like you are coming at 2 different ideas from 2 different. So earlier in the conversation, you said people need to advocate for themselves. They can, they can handle it. They can do it. Like all this stuff, like they're the ones that have to take control for themselves. But if I tell them that a 5.5 A1C is excellent and a 6 is very good and a 6.5 is good and a 7 is even good. You don't think that they can modulate for themselves and decide where they want to be?
No, because I think that you're giving a 6.2 a B, and I think they should be getting an A.
Based on,
I think that they should be feeling like they're in a really good place. And I find that the more that your numbers are in range, it's also easier to keep them even more in range. If they're doing a good job and they're pre-bolusing, it could even get better, and maybe they'll change insulins and it'll get even better. But it means that they're doing a good job. And if they stay 6.2 their entire life, that's an A.
So I agree with you. I think if you had a 6.2 blood A1C for your whole life, you are rocking it. It's fantastic.
If you have type 1. If you don't have type 1, you should be taking care of that.
But I also take credence in the people who go like, well, look, I don't have diabetes and my A1C is 4.9. So like that's 2 full points over. How do I know that that's not going to lead to neuropathy when I'm 50? And I think the truth is you don't know that or not. And
I know statistics. In other words, I know that statistically, obviously there are people, right, who can have really good A1Cs and still have some sort of complications. And obviously there's, the human body is super complex.
But your statistics aren't going to help me if it happens to me.
But you're telling everybody that it's better to have a 5.6 A1C. Who said that that's better, and that's not making people, like you say, people can handle it. But I'm not sure if that's really putting...
So they can handle some things, but not this?
No, you're saying, in other words, that it's okay for people to feel like that's not the best and that they should be doing better. And I'm not sure that that's a mental toll that's correct when I don't think that you're right.
Do you think that hold on, do you think I've told people that if they don't have a 5.5, they're failing?
No, I think that when you talk to people on the podcast and they say their numbers, right? So you're always very, very nice and specific about, and even when people post on Facebook, right? Like if somebody said like, oh, they managed to get from a 9 to a 7, yeah, that is amazing. And that is a place where I would say, that's so great. Like, I'm sure you're going to also manage to get down to 6.5. But it's when they got down to that below the 6.5 that I think that we have a different reaction to it.
I mean, I the only thing I can tell you is that this is interesting for me, obviously, and I'm interested in your perspective. I don't feel like I do that. And I don't think that I completely understand what you're saying, and I don't disagree with it. I reject the idea that I'm doing it.
So I'm not sure. First of all, people talk in different ways, right? And it depends on the episode that you're listening to.
Sure.
But I think that you can see in the Facebook group how people perceive it, at least the people who are really active.
Well, how you perceive it.
No, how other people are perceiving it.
You've talked to them?
How they perceive their own diabetes.
Okay. So like if I were to say to somebody like, hey, like they said, oh, I started off at an 11 and I have a 6.5 now. And I go, oh my God, what a great start. That's amazing. You're reading that is there's more to go. I'm saying in 6 months, look what happened already. What a great start to this whole thing.
Yeah, I think that you could read that comment
either way.
Ways. I think that there were like other comments that you can't read different ways like that.
So I genuinely
in other words, like, do you not think that it's better to be in a non-diabetic range because you think that eventually?
Oh, I see. No, I don't think it's better.
Figure out.
I don't think it's better to be a 5.5 than to be a 6 using just 2 random numbers. I don't think it's better to be a 5.5 than a 6.5, for example. What I think is that if it turns out that it is, when you find out, it will be too late.
But you already know that if you're below a 6.5, that your chance of complications are small, especially if you're keeping your time in range. So you're doing better than the people who are on the studies.
Is the chance not better if there's less sugar floating through your blood?
That's what I'm saying. Like you have to prove what you're saying as opposed to disprove what's already been shown. So I'm sure they're going to have to do major studies, right? It's going to take years.
You think that's going to happen?
Studies even with CGMs. Yeah. They're definitely going to be studies about people after a CGM, how many people have complications. And
so in between now and then, all the people who don't get the benefit of the new study, if they end up being a person that has complications, oh, well, we didn't have a study, so we didn't know what to say to them?
No, we have a study that says that their risk is super small if they keep their A1C below 6.5.
I would tell you that I've spoken to people who exist inside of these agencies, and What I think you have is numbers that they think people can aim for.
I'll tell you what, I had a really honest conversation with the endocrinologist last time we went. We were the last patient, so he had a lot of time, and he was asking me stuff about cancer. And I asked him about, like I said, like, what do you really think? You know, like what? And it was a conversation that was doctor to doctor, not doctor to patient.
I understand.
And he doesn't think that that's correct. In other words, I think there's a difference between, again, saying that a 7 is okay, right? Like, good job, and not actually looking at, first of all, again, time and range, and how low do you go when you're low, and how high are you going when you're high, and are you roller coastering or not, right? Because those are things that even if your time and range is okay, it's not healthy to be in a roller coaster. If you're going from 60 to 200 and your time and range is decent, but you keep going up and down, that's not healthy for your blood vessels.
1,000%. Right.
So I think that when you're looking at all of those things, like, he doesn't think that it's better to be lower. And also, you had somebody on who was talking about that she thinks it's really bad for the brain to be low. But she actually also, like, writes about that a little bit in Think Like a Pancreas. And I think that, like, people should be worried about lows.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Like, even being 60 for a long time might not be good for the brain the same way as maybe being 6.5 A1C isn't so good. And
I'm sorry, 60.
So we know that 55, right?
Okay,
why is the 55 chosen? Because we know that that's a bad number.
Right.
But it's probably not good to sit too low for very long trying to get our good numbers.
I agree with everything you're saying, just so you understand that. The part that I think that you're disregarding is that people aren't going to come to these things the way you're hoping they're going to. Like, just because it's how they should do it isn't how they're actually going to do it. And I agree with you.
But I think having a conversation about it, in other words, like, I think it's that these are things that have to be said, like, I mean, again, you're talking to the Juicebox podcasters.
I see what you're saying.
I think that it's something that gets lost that I see on the Facebook group, and that it's, like, concerning to me. Okay. And I think there's things that have to be said. What's evidence-based, right? What's what we think? And the truth is somewhere in the middle. Okay.
So I can agree with that as well. Let me ask you this question. Here's where you're outside of your depth a little bit. If I made a podcast where every time something like that came up, we went into a 10-minute excursion to explain it specifically, do you know how many people would listen to this podcast? None. Nobody would listen to it.
I just think it has to be explained specifically a few times, because the other side of it is talked about a lot.
It's in the Pro Tip series. Opinion. It's in the Bold Beginning series. It's in all that exists in all the management series. Like, both sides of the argument is in all of that stuff.
I don't listen to the management one so much.
I did it though.
But I looked on the what?
I did it though. I put it there. Like, so I can't. If
but I'm saying, like, people in the end, like, they listen to your podcast, they listen to, you know, a ton of stories, and, like, in the end, the management ones, I did listen to the pro tips in the beginning, but I didn't listen to the rest of them. But I think that, like, throughout time, like, I've heard it a lot. Yeah. Because I know when I'm in my car and I'm getting annoyed. So
it's fantastic. Well, listen, I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't discount it. I think I have said those things before. I think that everybody can't hear every word of this. And so that's where you get into the bigger problem. I can't force you to listen to the whole thing. You may get one episode where you don't get exactly what you need. As a point of example, I got a review the other day, and somebody's like, "You're a misogynist," and I'm like, "What the hell?" And so I looked to find out what happened. Some person I was interviewing used the word fangirl. I didn't even say it. Someone else said it. And now I'm a misogynist because that person said fangirl and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh my God, if you listened to the episode before that, you'd think I was Mother Teresa. But now today, because you heard that, you think this. So there's no way this is an ongoing conversation. People.
Right. I just feel like this part of the conversation, like, I listen to the podcast a lot on my way to work.
Yeah.
So it's not that I'm listening to just, like, one episode.
Right.
And I think that it's really important that it's important for people to realize that you can get a 5.6, 0.8 A1C with eating everything. My daughter also eats everything, like Arden, right? And that you can do it. In other words, there are certain things that's really important to hear, that, you can have a really good A1C, you can have really good time and range, and you can still eat what you want, and you can still kind of eat like a normal person. Mm-hmm. So I think that those are really important things to be heard. And I just think that also has to be heard somewhere in the middle.
So I'm gonna tell you something that I've said on the podcast a number of times. I can't say it every day because then nobody would listen. Here's where my thought process comes from this. I think that generally speaking, we teach to the lowest common denominator. And I think that that's a disservice to everybody, not just to the people who are not the lowest common denominator. So my example would be if there's 20 kids in a classroom and 2 of them are challenged and 5 of them are a little below average and 5 of them are average and 3 of them are above average and, the rest of them are brilliant. We dumb things down so that nobody gets left behind. But I think what that ends up doing is it's a disservice to the people, first of all, who you think the things need to be dumbed down for, because you're treating them like you can't possibly understand this. And then everyone else gets substandard information because we're busy talking down to people who we think can't handle it. And so I see the podcast as aspirational. Like when I talk about that stuff there, I think of it as aspirational. Like you can, if you understand the timing of insulin correctly and you have these tools and you have this understanding and you maybe eat a certain way that to help yourself, you could quite easily have an A1C in the 5s and it would be very stable and you could achieve it without lows. Is it easy? It is not. Do I want you?
I would say you can, but you don't have to in order to be healthy.
But that's your opinion.
A sentence that I would put on with it.
But that's your opinion. Yeah. And so what I'm saying is, you're welcome to your opinion. You should share it with everybody you want. If I tell people that, and 10 years from now, 20,000 people come back to me and say, I can't feel my feet, asshole. You said a 7 was okay. What am I going to do? And so I'm telling you that I think it's doable. I also think if you have a 6 A1C, you're doing great. I think if you have a 6.5 A1C, you're doing great. I think if you have an 8 A1C and that's the best you can do, you're doing great. Like, I believe that all the way through. I'm not saying one of these numbers is better than the other. I'm saying that if you have the right tools and the right understanding, you can probably put your A1C and your variability pretty close to where you want it to be. And then that's up to you to decide what to do with it. I can't come make you do it or tell you that it's that important to do. And you might be 1,000,000% correct. Maybe you can roll around a whole lifetime with a 6.5 A1C and never have a complication. But there will also people that will have them and they will have complications. And I'm not comfortable saying you're going to be okay because not everybody's going to be okay. And some of those people will have complications because they kept their A1C where they kept it. And so here are the tools to put it into the 5s.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
Exactly. Yeah, but we're both in the maybe not situation. And in your scenario,
except that in my scenario, that there is a lot of data to say that it's a safe place to be.
Yes.
And when you look at people, you're never 100%, right? When somebody has cancer and they say to me, what are my chances? Mm-hmm. I don't like giving numbers. And I usually say, to you, it doesn't matter what the statistics are because you're 100% of yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't matter to you if 90 other people were fine, if you're in that 10%. And it's also what I think, and I think that that's okay to say also about diabetes. Bad things happen for many, many reasons. And there can be a lot of reasons why you're more susceptible to different complications. And it's not only the diabetes playing a role.
Sure.
And the data is there that your chances of having complications are low if you keep your A1C below 6.5. And I would say more than you. I would say if you have an 8 A1C, that's not good. And I would want you to be working harder to figure out a way that you can do a little bit better, whether it's talking to your endocrinologist, whether it's, finding somebody else, some sort of coach to try to figure that out, because I don't think that that's a good place to be at.
Right. Unless you've been an 11 your whole life and you just got it to an 8, and then it's great.
No, then you're doing great because you're a start. And there I feel like it's okay to say, wow, great job. Amazing.
Alex, you would have a very thorough, valuable podcast that no one listened to. And I know that because, do you know the ADA has a podcast? Bet you didn't know that. You want to know why you didn't know that? No one listens to it. That's why.
It's true. Yeah. But the reason that I listen to your podcast is because diabetes is really lonely. And that's the reason that I started listening to it.
Oh.
And I hope that there's somebody out there listening to me say that's saying, oh, we can calm down a little bit. Like if I was that person who wrote that post and I got, those responses and I felt like, oh crap, like I have to be crazy right now. then maybe you can take a breath.
I agree.
And have perspective.
I want to tell you this too. I think that when you look at the Facebook group, you are mostly looking at newer diagnosed people. And so their fear is more amped up. And I do think if they stop and actually listen through the podcast, they would get to the place where you are, like with your understanding. But I think you're at your place because you're a physician. This is going to seem out of left field for a second, but if you're running a country, for example, okay, you make decisions based on the greater good, right? If I can make a decision today as the leader of a country that keeps 90% of my citizens safe, and the other option keeps 80% of them safe, well, I'm going to make the decision that keeps 90% of them safe. But 10% of the population is going to think I don't care about them. And that is a hard way to live, like being the person in that decision making. And I can see that from an outsider. Like, that's a horrible decision to make, but somebody has to make it. I'm glad there's someone there to make it. I think that's the perspective you're thinking about this from, which is like we can put everybody into a situation where most of them will do well, and hopefully that'll be fine. And I'm just saying that I'm okay with that. I understand that big decisions have to be made, but I'm not comfortable being the person who says that in this context. In this context, I think you should know that while there is absolutely no data right now to tell you that a 5.5 A1C is better than a 6 and that a 6 is better than a 6.5, I know there's no data that says that. And it's very possible that you're 1,000,000% right. My point is that if you're not right, or if that data comes up one day that proves us wrong, then it's too late. And I would rather...
What happens if the way that you tell it, right, causes a fraction of the people to have a lot of anxiety, a fraction of the people to have more lows in the 60s, not 40s, okay, than they would have otherwise had. And those things cause complications, and those things take years off your life also.
Why do you think that's happening,
I think that you have to be afraid of that also.
But why do you think that's happening?
Why do I think it causes people anxiety?
Why do you think that's happening as a result of the podcast? Because it's not, as far as I can tell.
I don't know if it's not or not. And sometimes I get the feeling in the group that maybe some people do feel like that.
You think people are running around with 50 blood sugars because they want their A1C to be low?
No, but people are more okay with having 5% lows than having 5% highs.
I think they have 5% lows and they still have 5% highs.
Maybe.
Yeah. This is fun.
But they feel worse about the highs.
Hey, you and I should get married so we could kill each other. That'd be fantastic.
I thought you agreed with me this whole time. It's like, I told you, this last one was going to kill it.
No. I don't not agree. So listen, I want to be really sincere. I take your point. I understand your concern. I think if you were me for 5 minutes, you'd soften on it a little bit.
I think that you're right, that my physician's outlook, right? My being a doctor, so it helps me maybe to feel okay with that, with certain risks, and to be worried about other risks.
The best part about our conversation is that hopefully for anybody listening, what they realized is while they're busy fighting in their own lives about whatever they're fighting about with other people, is that neither you nor I is wrong.
Yep.
A blend of what you and I are saying is what's important. And I can only come at this podcast from my perspective. And in fairness to me, I've also had thousands of conversations with people with diabetes. And so I do have maybe more than you, or maybe even more than other doctors. I do have a feeling about how most people come off and what their concerns are and what their, like, the bigger, more human pictures are. Like, even when you and I were talking about the ER, like, you were coming from a medical perspective. I was trying to come from a human perspective. And it's not that you don't see the human side of it, and it's not that I don't see the medical side of it. It's just that my perspective is more skewed towards, I've talked to a lot of people who go into a hospital. They expect to be faced with people who understand what they need, and very often they are not. And even though you told a story about an endocrinologist who didn't even understand how to basal a patient, you still argued on his behalf before the other side of it, because that's your perspective. And I think that's very valid.
And because I know that his boss, the one who I talked to about my DKA patient,
said it right
is super
eventually.
Smart.
Yeah.
And no, I don't know if that's the one that he talked to, but the person that I talked to after that patient, I saw how super smart she was.
Yeah.
And how much she knew. And that I think that again, healthcare is different where you're living, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you're living in a place that's a big city or not, and the doctors that come are different. But I think that most of the healthcare, at least here,
Mm-hmm.
is pretty darn decent.
Oh, I think healthcare is great. Right up until you get into these drill down situations where nobody knows what they're talking about, and you think that they do. In this series, where your episode will be, there is an ER nurse in America who has type 1 diabetes who said the words, "I'd be safer having a seizure at your house, Scott, than in the ER I work in." Now, how is that possible? How is that possible? Did you hear her tell the story of a person who worked in the hospital have a low blood sugar and they tried to send them out for a CT instead of checking his blood sugar?
But that really does make me wonder, where does she work? Where are these doctors coming from? Because even all like the stories about misdiagnosed type 2s, I mean, that was really basic in medical school. If you have someone who doesn't look like they're type 2 in terms of the other, their physical attributes and stuff like that, and I'm not saying that somebody who's overweight can't have type 1, but I'm saying we did learn, right, that if somebody doesn't look like they would be type 2, whether they're young, right, they're below 40, their weight isn't, they're not overweight, they're active, that you should look for something else. That you should look for Moby, that you should look for type 1, that you should look for LADA. Like, those are things that we learned in medical school. And I went to medical school 15 years ago, right?
She was standing in that ER saying, "He has diabetes, we should check his blood sugar." And no one would listen to her.
You got to look at the system that's cranking out the doctors, because I think is negligence. I don't think that.
Of course,
I don't think that most of the time that's the type of care that people.
But
get,
that's what you want to believe, and I think
it's what I see. It's what I see in three hospitals that I've worked in.
Right where you are.
Yeah.
But my point is if that exists anywhere, it's not okay. Right?
Yes.
So should we act like it's not happening?
No, but I think that trying to educate doctors, in other words, you want to educate doctors, right? First of all, checking somebody's blood sugar, right, when they're having a seizure or when they look like they're having a stroke, again, that's basic medicine. Mm-hmm. That's not something weird or crazy.
Right.
So if they don't know to do that, that's really problematic.
Yep.
And again, I think that the educating doctors is more educating, these serious conditions can become very serious very quickly. And you have to know that they can become very serious very quickly.
I agree with that.
And that when somebody says those words, type 1 diabetes, the first thing you want to do is just check their sugar for a second, just to figure out where they are. Does it have to do with diabetes? Does it not have to do with diabetes? And not a whole, again, I only listened to half of the first grand rounds, but a lot less and a lot more respect, I would say, or to what doctors are able to do. And
there's plenty of good doctors. And I would expect that if they listen to the Grand Round series, they'd say, "Oh, well, that's not how I do that, but I do see that other people do it that way." If they're insulted by that, I don't know what to tell them. Go fix your profession if you don't want people to say this. But you have no idea how many positive notes I got back about that series from people with type 1 diabetes who have been through the healthcare system and treated poorly and left to die and all the other things. And they're like, "Thank God, keep saying this," because maybe a doctor who is bad at it will hear it. Or maybe a person who has type 1 diabetes will go into a hospital.
I think they won't be able to hear it though when it's said like that. I think that they'll be able to hear it when it's said.
How should we say it to them? How do we tell them they're bad at their job and they don't understand anything?
See, I think that you don't want to say it like that.
Yeah, no, I don't. I hear you. How do you tell them?
And it's I would want the Grand Round series, right, to be something that I could send to my colleagues who I do respect and I do think are good doctors, right? Mm-hmm. And just as a, hey, listen to this. It really puts perspective on type 1. I listened to one of the people talk about doing a PET CT with type 1 diabetes, mm-hmm. somebody who had cancer, and that she got diabetes through immunotherapy.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to me as an oncologist to just see that perspective of what am I asking of somebody when I'm asking them to do a PET CT and they have type 1 diabetes.
Right.
And I think that's I want the good doctors to also be able to listen to it and not be like, "Oh, that's not me," but to be able to listen to it and say "Oh, interesting. I could incorporate this."
I'm going to tell you a secret. I didn't really expect doctors to listen to the Grand Round series. I wanted to couch the conversation in a perspective that let people know that you may or may not get a learned doctor and that it is up to you to take care of yourself. And here are some examples of why. And I did think it would catch some doctors, which, by the way, it has. I don't know if you've noticed, but the series has expanded to include other doctors who have come on to want to add their voice to it.
Those I did listen to.
Right? Oh, I see. And so, and how were they? They were pretty good conversations, huh?
And they come off smart, and they come off as doctors who know what they're doing.
Yep. And I agree with you completely, except I think people need to know that through randomness, they could land in an ER who doesn't even understand how to treat their hypoglycemia, or that they're even experiencing it.
Again, but I don't want somebody to think that the ER is a place where they should be getting healthcare advice about their diabetes. You should not listen to any doctor who's talking to you about your diabetes, except your primary care and your endocrinologist, because people will say incorrect things.
But you just expanded beyond what I said. Do you not think that people in an ER should know if you're experiencing hypoglycemia and how to treat it?
No. I'm saying yes, but I don't want you to listen. If that ER doc sits down with you and is like, hey, your A1C is 7, you should really be making these changes. Don't listen to them because they don't have enough experience.
Who do I listen to?
So to your endocrinologist and your
what if my
family
endocrinologist
doctor,
is bad?
And because diabetes is a disease where in the end you do know more than your endocrinologist. And my endocrinologist told me, like, I asked him for Humalog to go along with the Lumjev so that it wouldn't sting as much, because I saw that some people do that they mix it.
Yeah.
And I was worried that if it stung, that my daughter wouldn't give it a chance. Right. So I asked him for it, and he said, learn new things every day. Right.
Yeah.
And that he learns more from his patients. Like in the end, diabetes is a disease that it's ours, and we're going to know more than the endocrinologist, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
And what you have to do is to look for places where you feel like you get good information.
I agree with you.
Looking for information and reading it and listening to different podcasts and looking at different groups and leaving the groups where you feel like there is good information.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been fun. I've enjoyed this more than many things that I've done in quite some time. Also, I think when you listen back to it, you're going to hear where I expertly helped you to make my point for me. So, but I
don't know if I want to listen back at all.
Yeah, you shouldn't listen back.
If I do, I will let you know. Okay. Maybe I'm thinking that I got you to say my point.
I know, right? I know. I can't wait to find out which it is. Seriously, you and I should make a podcast together where we just argue about my podcast, and I think it would be fantastic. I think that would be more popular than this. But being sincere, Alex, I'm doing my best to spread good information to people, and my assumption is they will pick it up and take it where they can and where they can't. And I do imagine that there are some people that hear it and it makes them anxious. And I hope that they stop listening if that happens to them.
Why? I hope that they listen to this episode and they say, we don't have to be so anxious. We can take the good and leave the stuff that's not good for us. I also, as the person who's been making the podcast for the last 10 years, don't think that I've left people with the idea that if their A1C is not 5.5, they're not doing well. And so, but what I would say to you moreover is that I have done a thing with this podcast that no one else has ever done. I've brought diabetes information to people in a mass and made it entertaining so that they come back and learn more and stay in the conversation longer and have more experiences that they won't get to have in their normal life. And I watched for, I'd say probably 7 or 8 years while I blogged in the diabetes space. I watched companies try to do it. They tried to build communities. They couldn't do it. Some of them would build a community for 5 seconds. They couldn't maintain it. They'd fractalize, they'd fall apart, etc. I have a 50,000 person Facebook group, and it adds 150 new people every 3 days. And that's not because most people are anxious or scared when they're there. And I could show you thousands of emails from people who write to me saying that I saved their life or their child's life. And I don't think of myself that way, but they do. And so I take your point, but I think that overwhelmingly that's not what's happening. And I think that partly the reason you feel that way is because you're a newer diagnosed parent. And I imagine that 5 or 6 years from now, you won't feel the same way if you're still in that Facebook group. But that's just been my experiencing watching. What do you mean, that I wouldn't feel that other people are anxious?
I think right now your anxiety is helping you to feel their anxiety. I'm a
super not anxious person.
Okay.
Super not anxious.
That's fine. I'm good. And again, that's just my...
I get...
Yeah.
It worries me when I see how people answer sometimes, or things that are said.
For them.
I'm really super calm about diabetes.
So here, let me tell you some things you don't know. When you see a Facebook post that has 20 comments in it, I actually know how many people read the post. So yes, you hear from 3 people who are like, oh my God, this makes me anxious or whatever, however that makes you feel. But what you don't see are the literal thousands of people who read through the post and don't feel anxious about it. So there are 3 anxious people, and I feel bad for them, and I hope that there's something else out here that helps them not feel that way. But I'll trade those 3 anxious people for 7,000 other people who now know how to
I'm not talking
pre-bolus.
about the people who write in the post. I'm talking about the person who posted it. The person posted on a group, right?
Yeah.
That you really want it to be a group of support. I'm worried about that person, not about other people. You should scroll over what you don't want to read.
Well, wait, what about their post is concerning? Like, give an example.
Like somebody put their graph up and they're like, how can I fix this? I forget what it was, like the spikes or something.
Right.
And people came in with like a lot of different things. And I will say the person who asked it sounded a little bit more newly diagnosed and sounded a little bit anxious. And the graph was 90+% in range.
Yeah.
And I think that.
But they wanted to make it better.
So it's fine if you want to make it better.
Right.
I just would have wished that there would have been more than one person who came on to say, wow, that's a really great graph, just so you know. And there are a lot of different ways to try to, make it even more stable.
Yeah, but they didn't ask if this is a great graph. They asked, how do I make this better?
I forget how it was asked, but it didn't sound like that to me. Again, it's not like I don't actually remember each post that I saw and why it felt like.
I don't obviously know the exact post you're talking about, but I know posts like that. And what I'm going to tell you is that you have to respect people and answer the question they ask. Like, you can't say, if somebody comes in and says, how do I bolus for this thing? And it's a giant cupcake with 3 cupcakes stuck to it and ice cream on top of it. You don't come in and say, if you ate low carb, it wouldn't be a problem. Like, right? Because
I totally agree with that.
That's not the question they ask. So if I come in with a great graph and I say, hey, how do I improve this graph? My expectation
Again, I feel like we're talking about something that like I don't actually remember what the post.
I let you come up with the example, but okay, all right.
Sorry, take this part out.
You should not take this part out. You should have your own podcast, and you should call it "Arguing with Alex." I think it would be fantastic. And every week, someone just comes on. You pick a topic out of a top hat, and you start arguing about it. My God, I'd listen to that. You're terrific, by the way.
I only know a lot about 2 things: oncology and diabetes.
Would that stop you from arguing about something you didn't know about?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Good for you. I would argue about anything.
I think.
I think was funny. That's great. I so enjoyed this, so much so that I have to pay overtime for the editing, and I don't even care. So,
sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Unless you want to send me a couple of dollars. But I'll make out.
I explained that doctors don't make money here, so you don't got those dollars.
That's fantastic. I so appreciate you doing this. I hope that comes through. I thought this was fantastic, this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Hold on 1 second for me. A huge thank you to Eversense CGM for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Are you tired of having to change your sensor every 7 to 14 days? With the Eversense CGM, you just replace it once every 6 months via a simple in-office visit. Learn more and get started today at eversensecgm.com/juicebox. I'd like to thank the blood glucose meter that my daughter carries, the Contour NextGen blood glucose meter. Learn more and get started today at contournext.com/juicebox. And don't forget, you may be paying more through your insurance right now for the meter you have than you would pay for the Contour NextGen in cash. There are links in the show notes of the audio app you're listening in right now, and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to Contour and all of the sponsors. If you're not already subscribed or following in your favorite audio app, please take the time now to do that. It really helps the show. And get those automatic downloads set up so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.